Now, just a little warning before we begin, there will be major spoilers in this video for the 11th episode of Andor, so if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so even though I wouldn't call this the very best episode of the season, it still had its moments and it was still pretty excellent all around, and it certainly got us ready for next week's season finale by sort of getting all the pieces moved into position or on a sort of collision course with each other. As Gandalf might say, this episode is the deep breath before the plunge. And so to then just plunge right into the episode and begin the discussion, it starts with Melchi and Cassian holding on for dear life in more ways than one. We first see them clinging to the side of a cliff, kind of in an attempt to hide from Imperial patrols or ships, sort of waiting for them to finally give up their search for escapees, so that they can hopefully find some sort of way off the planet. But we see that Melchi is sort of on the verge of letting go in another way, or losing it mentally. He talks about how he can't feel his hands anymore, and he says he doesn't believe the ships that are looking for them, that they will ever leave them alone and go away. And you can just tell that he just can't take much more of this. Though Cassian finds a way, or finds the words, to kind of keep him going nonetheless, keeps him believing and fighting, which really seems to be one of Cassian's greatest strengths or abilities. Not so much that he is a leader, he doesn't exactly inspire people, but he knows how to, shall we say, push them or manipulate them however he needs to. He gets people to trust him and to buy into his words, or knows the right things to say, or how to handle people and push the right buttons to get what he wants or needs out of them. We see early in the season, in the first episode or two, that he owes a lot of people money, and it kind of gives you the impression people trust him when they maybe shouldn't, and that he uses that likability or his charisma and intelligence to simply gain advantage over people. Then in the prison, he does sort of that same thing to Kino as well. He knows what to say. Again, he knows what buttons to push with him to motivate him to become the leader of the prison revolt to get himself out of there. And now here he is yet again finding the right words to say to Melchi to keep him going. In other words, Cassian seems to be very good at understanding people, what makes them tick, and how to use that to his advantage most of the time. But as opposed to kind of earlier in the season, where he was again owing people money and probably kind of scamming them, he's now using his gift, you could say, maybe by default and not necessarily just to help others, but he's using it to help others as well. He is kind of progressing as a person. Moving on, in the next scene, we learn that Marva, Cassian's adoptive mother, that she has passed away, which I think we all expected to happen, and that it would be the sort of catalyst for the finale, that which would be the event that would bring them all together, that would bring Cassian back to Ferrix, where pretty much everyone is waiting for him to show up again. Either way, if Cassian didn't yet hate the Empire enough, he's going to hate them plenty enough now, or even more, because their existence and Marva wanting to be a part of the rebellion against them, that is kind of the reason she didn't want to leave with Cassian. She didn't want to leave Ferrix and go with him, and also why he had to, because he was on the run from them. And then while her health is failing, they imprison him for roughly a month, though it was supposed to be 6 years, of course, and they prevent him from being there for her in the end. In other words, here's a man with every reason to hate the Empire now, to become the Cassian who will give anything and everything for the cause. Also in this scene, we see a depressed droid. We see that B2 Emo is mourning the loss of Marva, which is interesting because it brings up the question or debate about droids in Star Wars and having emotions, which could absolutely lead to a fun conversation about AI and sentience here in the real world. But I'll say that is just a good discussion for another time, and move on. And so anyway, what this scene kind of reminds me of is a cross between what you do with or say to a child when their parents die, when they are very young and they die, and what do you do with someone's pet, like a dog or a cat, after they die. Because though, yeah, droids clearly have emotions, artificial or not everyone treats them that way in the Star Wars galaxy, and surely not everyone treats them like their children. And it's not the same level of responsibility should someone take a droid on after someone passes away, like it would be taking on someone's child. Though that said, they're also not pets in the same way we have pets here in the real world, since most, if not almost all droids have a practical function or application, and they do possess a level of sentience that pets, of course, do not. We also see, sort of like you might do with a child, we see an attempt to, you could say, distract B2 by giving him something to do, to get his mind off of it, something that he's told is of great importance, like, again, you might do with a child. And so again, B2 here sort of gets treated somewhere between the two, between a child and a pet, and he certainly gets treated far better than C-3PO did after his owner Padme died in Revenge of the Sith, since he just gets his memory wiped or erased by Bail Organa, and he says it like it's an afterthought, like, no big deal, just get rid of that droid's memory.
I'm placing these droids in your care. Treat them well, clean them up, have the protocol droid's mind wiped.
What?
Either way, it's a pretty emotional scene, and again, keeping that 3PO scene in mind, it maybe tells us that, like with damn near everything in life here in the real world, people treat or see things differently depending on who they are and where they come from. After this, we then see that Dedra learns what has happened to Cassian's mother, and that she sees it as a sort of opportunity, and maybe a last opportunity, to catch Cassian with this particular net, because with her gone, with his mother gone, he'll have less of a reason to ever come back to Ferrix anymore, and thus she tells those on site, her officers, to allow them, the people, the locals on Ferrix there, to have a funeral for her. Along with this, we also learn that as a prominent member of their society, Marva will be bricked, that she will have her ashes mixed with mortar and stone dust, and she will essentially be put into a wall, a very symbolic tradition, you could say, where it shows how the people of Ferrix believe it is the people that hold their society together, and is yet another way that shows how much thought was put into this series, that this is some really good world building, no pun intended. Up next, we get a scene where Cassian and Melchi spot a ship and some aliens, and after making a run for this ship to get off planet, they get captured and caught in a sticky web/net sort of thing. And I have to say, it was really nice to see some aliens, even though they were a bit hard to understand or make out, which is actually fine by me. I like or can kind of appreciate that not everyone is going to speak Galactic Basic perfectly. Anyway, at first it seems like the aliens are going to turn them into the Empire for 1,000 credits per head, but they get to talking to themselves and almost convince themselves to let them live or to not turn them in, because they realize they're not with the Empire, that these two that they've caught are trying to escape from them, from the facility that's poisoned their water and killed their, I think they called them squigglies or something like that, which I'm assuming is either a type of fish or just what they call fish in general. Anyway, eventually Cassian sort of talks them into, or again, they kind of talk themselves into helping them out and taking them where they need to go, which is back to Neomos, where Cassian was arrested, and where his money was, or maybe will be, still waiting for him. We then see that Vel has decided to pay Luthen or his shop a visit, which is a big no-no for secret rebels, even though as they kind of played off in the scene, it shouldn't be that suspicious or anything, considering Vel is quite wealthy herself, and her cousin Mon shops here, so yeah, it's a good cover should someone be keeping tabs on either Vel or the shop, that this is nothing out of the norm. Either way, Vel has come to tell Luthen that Cassian's mother has died, and that she herself is going to Ferrix, which is where Cinta, the woman she loves, is, who along with the Empire, of course, has been keeping a very close watch on Marva, and waiting for Cassian's return, Cinta in the hopes of killing him to tie up a loose end, and the Empire to get information from him. And what's interesting about this scene isn't so much the relaying of information we, the audience, already know, but it's the subtle game these two, Vel and Kleya, are sort of playing here. They seem to be, you could almost say, jockeying for favor or position with Luthen. We have Vel talking about how she gave Luthen Aldhani and the points that should score her, if you will, with him, and Kleya basically saying how she's here every day. She's countering by saying that she's the one who he really relies on the most to keep everything together on a daily basis, like when someone just happens to come banging on the door the way that Vel just did. And though this makes me really wonder just what is the deal with Kleya, what is her story, why is she so loyal to Luthen, what has got her into this fight, but it also really makes me again wonder, what is the deal with Luthen? Who exactly is this guy, and where has he come from? And I've heard some people say that they think he used to be a Jedi, but I don't think that makes any sense when you really stop and consider he'd then be a Jedi hiding in plain sight, and dealing with some of the richest and most wealthy people on Coruscant. I mean, he has Mon Mothma coming to his shop, bringing with her a driver who is an Imperial spy. If he was a former Jedi, certainly he'd be in some sort of database of potentially still living Jedi that the Empire would be actively looking for. Plus, you'd think that Mon would know he was a former Jedi and hence wouldn't deal with him openly and risk potential suspicion cast upon her if he's found out. Not to mention, I don't think the idea here, for better or worse, is to show that the one who really gets the rebellion going, who was the glue that brought it all together in the early days, that he was a former Jedi. It kind of seems to defeat the whole point of the series, which is to show how the common person in the galaxy, the non-Force user, how they rise up and make a stand against the Empire. But leaving Luthen and who he might be behind, another sort of heart-wrenching scene is up next with B2, who I still think, as I've speculated elsewhere, I still think he will somehow become or be a part of the reprogramming of K2SO in the next season. Anyway, after another of those scenes with B2, we get to, you could say, see what's left of Bix after being tortured, that she looks absolutely horrible and she can't get the screams of those dying children, those dying alien children out of her head. But before talking more about that, just let me take a quick moment to note that I do really appreciate how much they made the technology of the galaxy in this series look and feel so much like we see it in A New Hope, even taking literal pieces of it from time to time, or things or designs directly from that film. Anyway, going back to Bix, we see them asking her about Anto Krieger, asking her if this is the guy she introduced to Andor, and warning her that if they don't believe her answer, they're essentially going to torture her again. And you can just see on Bix's face that she understands the futility of her situation here, that she's going to tell them, no, this isn't the guy, but they're not going to believe her, even though she is being honest, and she's going to be tortured again anyway. They're going to get Dr. Gorst back for another round of listening to children. And I do wonder if somehow, someway, Andor ends up rescuing Bix in the finale next week, that he comes home, hears that she has been captured, and then uses the funeral of Marva as sort of a distraction to go and rescue her, figuring that the Empire is going to be looking for him at the funeral, not wherever Bix is being held. Anyway, right or wrong, I think he is going to see Bix or hear about her, and he's going to see what the Empire has done to her, or learn what the Empire has done to her, and he gets then to add yet another reason to his long list of reasons to hate them and to fight them and to again become the guy we'll see in Rogue One. Either way, we next are back on Coruscant, where Mon Mothma is watching her daughter chanting, almost like a cult member, you could say, with a bunch of other girls her age, that this is apparently some sort of return to the traditional ways by her, and it's her choice, not even her father is pushing this on her. And these are ways that I'm assuming see girls or women be more subservient to men and to be treated like possessions that are to be traded away or bartered, you could almost say, or used to garner favor or position, to move up in status, whatever it might be. And you could certainly ask why they, Mon's daughter, and these other girls would be in favor of this and going backwards, you could certainly say. And Mon even points out to Vel, who shows up and talks to her about all this, that it's even stronger. This going back to the traditional ways is even stronger, or the trend is even stronger away from their homeworld of Chandrila. And in theory, there could be a lot of reasons for this, like simply wanting to hold on to your identity in a foreign land with foreign ways, though you think it would be the adults more in favor of that. Or it could be kind of the opposite, that the older generation is moving away from something and the younger ones find it rebellious to return to it. You know how the next generation almost always thinks they know better than the previous one, and they tend to latch on to what the previous generation opposes. Either way, this is all kind of horrifying to Mon and Vel, because they quite clearly are not fans of the old ways. Mon has ended up in an unhappy marriage, and well, Vel has no interest in ever marrying a man and has been kind of ridiculed before for it. We saw Perrin questioning why she's not married yet in a previous episode. And so seeing Lita embrace all of this is rather saddening, I would say. And yet at the same time, Mon knows all of this is going to be useful to her. It's going to make everything with Davo, who wants his son and her daughter to eventually marry, it's going to make that all easier, and Mon, hates herself for it. She hates that she's going to use the old ways that she feels should change in order to get what she needs done. She's betraying not only her daughter, but her own ethical code at this point. But as she basically explains to Vel, she has no other choice, that since Aldhani happened, which of course Vel was a large part in doing, the Empire has frozen all accounts, and they're going to now find out that Mon has been up to, well, moving money around to basically fund the rebellion. And this would probably destroy her family and ruin her daughter's life anyway. So now she can justify her actions of giving away her daughter by, well, saying this is what her daughter wants anyway, for one, and that it'll make her happy by following these old ways she is in favor of, even though she herself does not approve of them. Mon, though, also has to live with the knowledge that there is every chance her daughter will someday find out the hard way when she's miserable in an arranged marriage like Mon currently is, that the old ways aren't so great after all. Again, Mon is truly hating herself, but sees no other way out than to give away her daughter, to let her daughter embrace these ways that she is not a fan of, in order to save her. Moving on then, we see that Cyril is getting a call in the middle of the night from former Sergeant Mosk, who is now working in a foundry of some kind after probably being kicked off the force, if you will. Yet despite that, he has still heard that Andor's mother has died and wants to let Cyril know because he thinks he may now go home to attend the funeral, that Andor will go home, and of course Cyril would want to know that. And what this scene really does is, of course, it gets another piece in place for the finale. It gets Cyril to Ferrix for the finale next week, where who knows what will happen. Next up is another brief scene that shows us Cassian's money, after a month or so, is still right where he left it, on top of a shower, basically. And that in the briefcase is also Nemik's journal, which I'm guessing he's going to listen to at some point in the near future, and that it'll help him transition or be one of the last pieces of the puzzle that makes him, again, the true rebel we see in Rogue One, the guy who will die for the cause. After that, it's another fantastic scene between Luthen and Saw Gerrera, where Saw has changed his mind about the attack Luthen proposed earlier, the one that Krieger is going to be carrying out or leading, and he's now willing to do it, he's now willing to help, if he can do things his way. Problem, of course, is that Luthen now knows the Empire is laying a trap for Krieger, but isn't going to warn Krieger, because it'll let the ISB know that they have a spy in their ranks. Furthermore, if the ISB and Empire get a win like this, it'll make them feel invincible, Luthen says. It'll basically make them overconfident and to once again start to underestimate the rebellion or treat them like they're little more than a nuisance that can be stomped out easily enough, which will allow them, the rebels, an easier time to operate. And the whole point of this scene is trust, which, as I've talked about before, has been the greatest weakness or obstacle to overcome for the early rebellion, that they all have to look out for themselves and lie to each other. These individual cells and operatives have to lie to each other, because in an odd sort of way, too strong of a connection between them, too easy to follow of a line between them, can bring the whole thing down. One domino falling over will lead to all the others behind it falling over. And so, though, yes, this is Luthen still understanding how dangerous trust can be, and he's being backed into a corner here. He's being given a choice between not trusting Saw or trusting him and potentially risking himself in the process. But this is also him maybe realizing to some degree that they're never going to win without trust, that something bigger than a scattering of individual cells or, again, operatives is the only way to achieve victory over the Empire in the end, that they will have to work together at some point. And so again, not entirely by choice, mind you, he's trusting Saw with information he didn't really have to trust him with. He could have made an excuse as to why Saw shouldn't go on this mission with Krieger, and at first he does try to do this, but when it's clear Saw isn't going to buy any of these excuses, he's honest and puts the ball in Saw's court, you could say. He's trusting Saw to do the right thing, and in the long run is going to hopefully strengthen the rebellion by strengthening their trust in each other. And in the end, after a bit of clever convincing on Luthen's part, even casting suspicion on Saw's right-hand man, that being the aptly named Two Tubes, Saw perhaps begins to see how quickly and easily trust can start to crack, that it only took one accusation from Luthen to cast a shadow of suspicion, and that at some point constant paranoia, even though it keeps you alive, at some point it has to give way to trust or you're never going to win. You're going to have to risk it all to win this war. Moving on, we then have a scene where Kleya and Luthen are in code, basically telling each other what's going on, and Luthen is telling her what he is going to do next. And what that something is to go to Ferrix in search of Andor, because they don't want him to fall into the hands of the Empire, because he is one of those people that can basically out Luthen. And this is, again, setting up the finale. It's moving yet another piece into position for whatever is going to happen next. We know that all of these characters, more or less, are going to be on Ferrix for, again, whatever happens next week. This is then followed up by a really, really cool sort of space battle scene, which, though awesome to behold, and added a bit of action to an otherwise actionless episode. Not to mention, once more makes me wonder just who in the world Luthen Rael truly is. Where did you learn to fly like this? But instead of delving into it and recapping just how cool it was and how badass Luthen is, let's instead get to the final scene of the episode, which starts with Cassian learning that his mother has died, and thus moving the final piece into position for this upcoming finale, where everything and everyone is going to collide. Along with this, we sort of saw Melchi, I don't know, looking a little guilty to have survived the whole ordeal, while so many others likely did not. Here he is standing on a beach and looking at the ocean, while who knows how many of his others are floating or sunk in an ocean somewhere. He then says that someone has to let everyone know what was going on in that prison before the two then go their separate ways. For now, we of course know Melchi will ultimately end up in Rogue One as well. And so in closing here, like I said at the top, this probably wasn't the best episode of the series, which doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it, doesn't mean it wasn't good, but it does get a bit outshined by some of the other episodes that have been absolutely fantastic. Nevertheless, it did everything it needed to do in order to set up what will no doubt be an exciting, action-packed finale to what has been an absolute gem of a series overall, a surprise piece of greatness out of Disney Star Wars. One that I can only hope more and more people will find and watch, that I can only hope, like Melchi says at the end of this episode, that others out there need to be told about this, that others need to know about the series Andor. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this episode, or what you think is going to happen in the finale, or what you've been thinking of the series overall. Whatever the case may be, you know what to do. Leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.